The sustainability problem that I'm addressing is the modern agricultural system's use of agrochemicals in monoculture crop farms. This is the system that we use to grow most of our produce. Monoculture farming is defined by Salem Press Encyclopedia as the agricultural practice of growing only one crop over a large section of land. They rely on heavy agrochemical use because traditional ecosystem services are not active. These systems are completely unsustainable for several reasons. The three E's of sustainability, environment, equity, and economy, are all issues when it comes to monoculture food systems. Monoculture farms rely heavily on chemical inputs due to lack of crop rotation and diversification. The nutrients in the soils are depleted by planting the same thing in the same place over and over again, which leads to excessive use of chemical fertilizers. These fertilizers end up polluting surface, groundwater, and the air, which is an environmental problem. The fertilizer chemicals used also enter rivers and lakes, causing dead zones which do not allow for any animal life to exist. They can also become air pollutants, adding to the destruction of the ozone layer and global warming. That in the United States, over 25% of drinking water wells contain nitrate levels above the 45 parts per million safety standard. These high nitrate levels are very bad when it comes to human health. This can cause methemoglobinemia, also known as blue baby syndrome, in kids, as well as esophageal, gastric, and bladder cancers in adults. This puts rural residents at a greater risk and creates a problem of equity. As for economics, farmers receive subsidies for growing large amounts of commodity crops such as corn and soy, enticing them to practice monoculture farming. Also, as pointed out in the Salem Press Encyclopedia, farm machinery is very expensive, and few farmers can afford the equipment necessary to handle more than one or two different crops. Typically, 20 to 30% of crop yields are lost due to pests, despite the ever-increasing amounts of pesticides used. The pesticides used by U.S. farmers per year usually total about $40 billion. These pesticides have numerous detriments associated with their use, including environmental impacts on wildlife, pollinators, and natural enemies. The reliance of monoculture farms on agrochemicals is a vicious cycle that looks much like the trap that Meadows calls shifting the burden to the intervener. The burdens in this situation are the dependence of farms on applying chemical pesticides and fertilizers. The more they are used, the more they are needed, making this a reinforcing loop. These are symptom-relieving practices that don't really address the problem. According to Meadows, the way to get out of this trap is to enhance the system's own ability to solve its problems and to build the system's own capabilities back up before removing the intervention. The system of monoculture farming is nested into the industrialized food system, which is nested into the system of agriculture, which is then nested into the system of economics, which is nested into the social system, which is then nested into the most important system, the environment. This diagram explains a simplified version of the system of monoculture farming and the use of agrochemicals. The stock in this diagram is the monoculture farms. Inflow to the farm stock are herbicides and pesticides, as well as chemical fertilizers. The outflow from the farm stock is the crops produced. The first two reinforcing loops go from the stock of farms back to more fertilizer use due to loss of biodiversity and loss of nutrients in the soil. The crops build up a resistance to herbicides and pesticides, which leads to a reinforcing cycle of more pesticide and herbicide use. Another reinforcing loop is caused by the loss of crops due to weeds and pests despite pesticide and herbicide use, leading back to, again, more pesticides and herbicides. Finally, there is an overall reinforcing loop of the whole system, which happens when the food crops are consumed by humans and livestock, causing more crops in more monoculture farms to be grown. Monoculture farming leads to a vicious cycle of environmental, human, and animal health deterioration. This widespread health deterioration starts with soil damage, then to erosion, to runoff, to water damage, to dead zones, to biodiversity loss, all leading back to more deterioration of the health of the environment and the humans and animals which rely on it for life. To create a more sustainable system and solve this problem, I would take Meadows' advice and enhance the system's own ability to solve its problems, and build the system's own capabilities back up before removing the intervention. There is a simple solution: polyculture, or diversified farming systems. By diversifying the crops grown, biodiversity increases and a good habitat for pests' natural enemies is created. Start practicing crop rotation to build up the nutrients in the soils and break the cycles of weeds, pests, and diseases. Using cover crops will improve soil fertility, soil structure, and water penetration, prevent soil erosion, modify the microclimate, and reduce weed competition. By creating a paradigm shift, we can restructure the whole system. We need a new strategic approach to research and education for ecological and social sustainability in food and agriculture. But it's more than just the ecology that we need to pay attention to. The social, political, and cultural aspects that need to see comparable changes along with agriculture in order for any great differences to occur. We need to implement policies that encourage resource-conserving practices instead of discouraging them. If we could create a more stable base of financial and infrastructural support, we could expand the range of this essential work and realize much greater social and ecological benefits. Monoculture farming is not sustainable. It is a system filled with reinforcing feedback loops that cause destruction to the planet and the people who rely on it for food. The system of polyculture is sustainable and provides a number of ecosystem services, such as crop pollination, natural pest control, soil and water quality maintenance, efficient nutrient cycling, and biodiversity conservation. Monocultures do not have these benefits and have to use chemicals to try to achieve them, which just ends up creating more problems. The Salem Press Encyclopedia says that monoculture is the most efficient means of producing the yields of crops needed for such a large and growing number of people. But more and more researchers are showing that it is very possible to grow the same amount of crops sustainably through polyculture.